This is BBC News. I'm Yalda Hakim with a special hour-long programme about the conflict in Afghanistan and the future of the country. As the Taliban take yet another provincial capital and close in on Kabul, there are reports from the peace talks that the Taliban have been offered a power-sharing deal. So what is the Taliban's endgame? I've been talking exclusively to a Taliban commander about the kind of rule they would impose.
If someone were to steal or commit adultery, what should happen to them?
The punishment is cutting off the hand and foot. And if someone commits adultery, then they should be stoned.
How did Afghanistan descend so quickly into intense fighting, and what does the future hold? I'll be talking to the Afghan Ambassador to the US, and we'll also get the view from Pakistan. Well, many blame the Taliban's rapid advance on America's troop withdrawal. I'll be getting reaction from General H.R. McMaster, who served as US National Security Advisor under President Trump. Hello and welcome to viewers in the UK and around the world to this BBC News special on Afghanistan, an endless war. Well, in the last hour, reports of an offer of a power-sharing deal from the Afghan government to the Taliban in return for an end to fighting. If true, this would be a remarkable breakthrough made against a backdrop of growing Taliban control of territory across Afghanistan. Well, there's been resulting humanitarian crisis as thousands leave their homes to get out of those areas. Just today, in the country's second city of Kandahar, reports of intense street-by-street fighting. In the southern city of Lashkargah, the militants have taken over the police headquarters. Now, the Taliban advance has been incredibly fast. As recently as last month, it only controlled these areas shown in red. But now, following the withdrawal of Western troops, the red wave has spread to all these areas too. And today, Ghazni became the 10th of the country's 34 provincial capitals to come under Taliban control. The Afghan government is reportedly attempting to unite a host of fractured Afghan militias against a common enemy. It has also been holding peace talks with the Taliban for a year in Doha, but until today's rumours of a deal, no progress had been made. I'll be asking for the reaction to this news from the Afghan Ambassador to the United States in a moment. First, I've interviewed two high-profile figures in the Taliban chain of command. I asked them what they want from the Afghan government and how they would rule the country if they could return to Kabul.
Afghanistan 2021. The Taliban are back, taking city after city from government forces. The withdrawal of foreign troops has left a power vacuum the Taliban are rushing to fill. If they take power, many people here fear a return to their brutal regime of the 90s, characterized by public executions, stonings, and girls being banned from school. Despite the historic peace deal that was signed between the US and the Taliban in February 2020 and the ongoing peace talks taking place in Doha, Qatar, between the Afghan government and the Taliban, no progress has been made. I travelled to Doha to meet with Suhail Shaheen, a member of the Taliban peace negotiation team. He's been living here for the last 15 years. If you were to return to Kabul, how would you govern?
There was in the past some mistakes that we have learned from, because at that time you were new to the government. To stop education of women and girls, that is not our goal. Of course, education is their right, and it is much needed. And when they receive education, they, of course, they have a right to work. According to my knowledge, though I'm not a religious scholar, it is very difficult to find proof to stone a woman. If it is not impossible, but it is very, very difficult.
While Suhail Shaheen continues to talk about peace, it's clearly not a view shared by Taliban commanders closing in on Afghanistan's cities. Back in Kabul, Taliban commander Maulana from Helmand agreed to meet me. He was among 5,000 Taliban prisoners released by the government last year in the hope of furthering peace talks with the Taliban. He's now leading 300 Taliban fighters in his province. Do you want the Taliban regime to come back into power, or do you think that there should be a power-sharing deal with the current government, like the discussions that are being had in Doha?
We would be happy to have a joint government under the umbrella of Islamic Sharia. A Sharia-based system in Afghanistan, like the system the Taliban used to have.
If we talk about law and order and justice, if someone were to steal or commit adultery, what should happen to them?
All this is clearly stated in the Quran. If someone steals, there is a punishment. For example, for some thefts, the punishment is cutting off the hand and foot. And if someone commits adultery, then they should be stoned.
What about girls going to school? Can girls go to school, and up until which age?
If a girl wants to go to school, she is permitted, but her school should be girls only. Also, her teachers should be women. She should be able to study up to the age of 12 or 13.
And if there isn't a political resolution to this conflict, are you prepared to take Kabul by force?
I'm trying to defeat the government, and they're trying to make me disappear. In the end, we'll be compelled to kill one another.
Increasingly, it appears there is a disconnect between what is being said by the political office in Doha and what the Taliban commanders and foot soldiers are doing on the ground in Afghanistan. But the Vice President of Afghanistan remains defiant.
This group in Doha, they are a deceptive facade of a very dark reality called the Taliban.
So in your view, have they changed?
No, not only they have not changed, they have become savvier in deceiving.
Are you willing to pick up arms again if you have to?
I am already armed against them.
You've got the whole army. But I mean, if you really had to go head to head,
yes.
If Kabul fell.
Yes. No way. There's no way I can surrender to the Taliban. None. No way.
With the government adamant to defy a new era of Sharia law and the Taliban making significant gains, Afghans now seem to be caught up in a savage war that has taken on a life of its own. Yalda Hakim, BBC News, Kabul.
Well, that's Afghanistan's vice president there saying he would never surrender to the Taliban. But would the government consider a power-sharing arrangement? And have they offered one? I'm joined now by Adela Raz, the Afghan ambassador to the United States. Adela Jan, thank you very much for joining us. I'd like to put this to you because I interviewed Vice President Amrullah Saleh and he said to me, I'd rather sooner pick up arms and take on the Taliban, gun battle with them rather than surrender to them. And now we're hearing these rumours that there is a potential offer of a power-sharing agreement.
Thank you, Yalda John, for having me on the program. I think there is a clear distinction which His Excellency First Vice President mentioned, and I think that's the surrender. In terms of surrender, people of Afghanistan have been once there when Taliban regime was in power, and we truly have seen what it meant for women, what it meant for young men, what it meant for education, what it meant for human rights. It was the continuation of atrocities. And that was not even too long, but we're still seeing the same evidence in certain provinces that they're taking control over. They're killing women because she was dressed inappropriately. They're killing a comedian, they're killing a historian, they're killing journalists. So we truly know surrender means to surrender to atrocities and tyranny. But in terms of a political settlement, we have said that from the first day, and we're continuing to say, the government and the people of Afghanistan are ready for a political settlement.
So there's no deal that's been struck in Doha at the moment?
True, that's true. There is no deal yet. But we're not giving up hope. We're not giving up hope on peace. We're not giving up hope on prosperity and stability.
But you have virtually no leverage.
That is also correct. We don't. Unfortunately, we are going to the negotiating table with having nothing in our hands.
Who do you blame for that?
I think we need to blame the process, the way it was carried away, the whole good intention that it was behind having a peace deal, opening a negotiation, a window for negotiation. But leverages that the US government had, the leverage that the government of Afghanistan had, which was the release of 5,000 prisoners. We did release them. But right now, there is one thing else we have to also remember. That is, Taliban is still in the sanctions regime. They're still under the UN sanction, and they're still having a strict restriction on when to travel and for what purpose, and that needs to be tightened up.
But is there a power-sharing agreement on the table at the moment?
We need to speak with the team that are negotiating right now in Doha. I spoke to them yesterday. Some were optimistic, some were still not optimistic. But we must be optimistic to the future of Afghanistan.
But you would share, you talk about the executions, the stoning, the killing of journalists, activists. You said we've seen the kind of regime that they are from the 90s. You yourself have lived through it. Could you see them coming back to Kabul and there being a power-sharing agreement?
If they agree to the terms we propose, and when we say we, that's the people in the government of Afghanistan and our allies and supporters, we have certain terms that we have given forward. That's the foremost important condition for us for that power sharing structure was that there has to be equal constitutional rights for both men and women and minorities in Afghanistan. And that must be accepted. There has to be no constitutional barriers for women in the future. I think these are very specific terms. We also said that there must be a representative democracy in Afghanistan. The people of Afghanistan must have their political freedom to choose who they wish to have as the leader, president, or whatever structure we define. But we have seen from the first day that was their intention to change the way they think from the first day. And Yalda John, you know that whoever we spoke, who were at the negotiating team from the government of Afghanistan, from the Islamic Republic, they said Taliban have not changed at all.
But now you're in a desperate situation. Do you think that Kabul is going to fall?
Look, I've been asked these questions since yesterday many times. And my answer is, I don't want to believe Kabul is falling. Because if I believe that is the collapse of the government, and I don't have any choice beyond survival.
Do you feel abandoned by the United States?
Look, I have really good conversation with my counterparts here. I had a really good meeting with the Ministry of with DOD here. There is a genuine commitment to help us, to support us, but a lot of time they're also struggling with the high-level political endorsement within their own administration. So sometimes we feel troubled with that, but we're continuing to have very good conversation. There is a call that's scheduled.
The president has said that we're doing everything possible to support the Afghan people, but at the end of the day, this is their fight. Is this an internal Afghan matter?
I wish it was. I really, really wish it was. I wish Taliban were local insurgents, that they were unhappy with the way the government was governing the country, and they just wanted to be part of the government and take some part of control in the political structure. I think that solution would have arrived 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago. But it is not. We know really well, with strong evidence in the ground and with third party, with the UN sanctions report and monitoring team that arrives, they say Taliban have linkages to international terrorist group, not only Al-Qaeda. So it's more complex. It's a proxy war. It's a war against international terrorist group, and it's not a civil war. It's not a local war. And
but you also have,
Adela
John, you also have an incredibly weak government. You have troops that are deserting their posts. They're retreating. We're seeing, carloads of soldiers leaving areas. What sort of message does that send to the average Afghan person who's looking to the Afghan government for leadership?
Look, it's a very, very difficult time. And there were the presence of the most important and strong countries of the world. Their military presence was in Afghanistan. And none of us were able to end this war the way we wanted to end it. So it doesn't really come to only one concern to say or blame its weak leadership, or to say that our ANDSF, National Security and Defense Forces, they do not have the courage or the confidence. They do. But look, Yalda Jan, our history is still in the living memories of Afghans. It wasn't too long ago, after the collapse of the Soviet regime. What happened? Dr. Najibullah's time, there were moments and there were days and months where certain provinces were given at the time to Mujahideen. So people do have that memory, and they still think there might be a very hidden agreement between maybe the US government and Taliban. There is an agreement that they may not be aware of.
But the president, for example, is dismissing and sacking the chief of the army in the middle of this war. Is this the time to be making this kind of reshuffling?
I think it is definitely the time, because we do need to make the right changes. And if you have seen, it was highly welcomed by security forces, this change. It doesn't mean the previous chief army, he did not perform well, but we needed somebody with fresh blood and fresh energy to arrive and do the job.
And Adela Jan, if the Taliban do overrun the country, do you think that you could ever return?
Look, Yalda Jan, I've been trying to answer this question. For me, there is no choice of Taliban overrunning the country, because the alternative is worse. So I'm fighting, my country is fighting, our people are defending our rights and our living and life. So no, I don't think so they will be able to ever do that.
Adela Raz, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme.
Thank you.
Well, I'm joined now by Lutfullah Najafizadeh, head of Tolo News TV in Kabul. Lutfullah Jan, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. We're seeing the situation unfold in Afghanistan. Do you have any hope?
I think that it's a very delicate situation. I think Kabul can be protected. I think some major cities can be protected if we have some out-of-the-box solutions on the US side, on the Afghan side, and also when it comes to countries in the region. So and these are very, very difficult choices for all sides to make. I think the country has never been tested and challenged like today. This morning when I passed one of the big parks in Kabul, I could see thousands of homeless and displaced Afghans who have come to Kabul from neighboring provinces. And that's very, very difficult to see that Afghans, once again, is going through so much.
What do you want from the government? Because many of the people who are displaced say that they've had nowhere to go and the government has not been helping them.
I think the government is paying a lump sum price, or the country is paying a lump sum price for years of mismanagement, for years of bad politics, for years of very narrow-minded politics. And that has resulted into what we see today in the battlefield, where a lot of soldiers are not fighting. Today we saw that a provincial governor who was very recently appointed, he fled Ghazni before the city fell to the Taliban, and he came to Kabul. They arrested him here. Let's not forget that this was the same governor that a few months ago the Kabul government wanted to go to war against one of the warlords in the north. So some of these bad decisions, I think, contributed to where we are today. Also compounded by, of course, the departure and the way the U.S. forces departure is announced. So that has also killed the morale. The two of them combined has led Afghanistan to where it is today.
You represent everything that the Taliban doesn't want in Afghanistan. Tolo News and the way that you operate. You've got Afghan Star, you've got female reporters on the ground, you've got newscasters who are women. You have been part of the gains of the last 20 years. The people who work for you, you yourself, believe in the freedoms and opportunities that have come with the US-led invasion of Afghanistan. Do you think that your organization will exist if the Taliban overrun Kabul?
I think what we represent is what majority of the Afghan people want. In 2/3 of the Afghan under 25, such a young country, a young population. A lot of Afghans have managed to go to school. Access to education has been unprecedented. Nearly 10 million kids at school. Historically speaking, the past 20 years has been a unique opportunity for Afghans that a lot of people have embraced that. So now I think we are entering in this very, very unique military situation that is not just putting risk or addressing risk to Tolo organizations like Tolo News, but to so many Afghans. And that's why I think it's very important for all the stakeholders to rethink. I don't think this is the end of the road. I think the next few weeks are very, very critical, and players like the United States has to revisit some of the decisions before it is too late.
Lutfullah John, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. Well, I'm joined now by General H.R. McMaster, who served as US National Security Advisor under then-President Trump from 2017 to 2018. General, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. We've just heard from two Afghan voices. You've spent time in the country. I just want your reaction to what you heard.
Well, Yalda, I think what we're seeing is a disaster unfolding that was completely predictable. Predictable because of our self-delusion and our self-defeat. I mean, I think what you're reporting today, but across your career has exposed are really three elements of the self-delusion. First of all, that the Taliban is going to share power. They're not going to share power. The second is that maybe they'll impose a more benign form of Sharia. Of course, that's not the case. And the third is that there's this bold line, between the Taliban and other jihadist terrorist organizations. And so what we're seeing now is the results of that, right? And you've heard the mantra over years, Yalda, there's no military solution to Afghanistan. Well, I mean, the Taliban has one in mind. And what we're seeing is the results of our abandonment of our sustained effort to support security for the Afghan people there, and the reversal of the tremendous gains made since 2001. And Yalda, what breaks my heart here, is that how after so many years and so much investment in blood and treasure and effort, people were willing to walk away, because of this really false narrative about the war. I mean, nothing's been accomplished there. We've wasted trillions of dollars, and all of that was really false. Okay, Afghanistan had not transformed into Denmark, but Afghanistan doesn't need to be Denmark. It just needs to be Afghanistan. And the Taliban are exposing themselves again.
President Biden.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
President Biden says the Afghans need to fight this war themselves, that this is the problem of the Afghans. Is that fair?
No, it's not fair, because these are the enemies of all civilization, of all humanity who we're fighting. And the reason that we went to Afghanistan was because nearly 3,000 innocents were murdered on September 11th, 2001, in the most devastating terrorist attack in history. And so what we have to recognize is that this is not an Afghanistan problem. This is a humanity problem on a modern day frontier between barbarism and civilization. And what it required was a sustained effort. I mean, Yalda, what is crazy about this is before the capitulation agreement of 2019, we had 8,500 troops there. Okay, now if we were Ecuador, that might be a stretch, but we're not. We're the United States of America, and we actually had allied troops there of equal number, and so this was a sustained and sustainable commitment. But the reporting, I think, about the war, the war was underreported. I think it was skewed. I think there was a really strange dynamic, Yalda, of of almost, how victims, identify with their abusers. There was this some sort of crazy, I don't know, almost affinity, for these brutal, murderous Taliban. And, now we're waking up to the reality. And the question is, are we going to do a damn thing about it?
Well, do you think that America is going to be forced back into Afghanistan, perhaps in 12 months' time, in 18 months' time?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the reason is we know from even our most recent experience that wars don't end when one party disengages, right? It was, paradoxically, right? It was Vice President Biden then in December of 2011 who called President Obama on the phone from Baghdad, Iraq, and he said, "Thank you for allowing me to end this goddamn war." Well, guess what? The war didn't end when the United States disengaged. Al-Qaeda in Iraq didn't look around and say, "Oh, hey, the Americans are gone. Let's just stop." And so the self-referential mantra of ending endless wars doesn't recognize that jihadist terrorists are waging an endless jihad against us, which demands us to be engaged for our own security and, as I mentioned, for the future of all humanity.
Where does this leave America standing in the world? Because America talks about great power competition, but if a Xi Jinping looks at America abandoning its allies, as the Afghan ambassador to the UN alluded to, or if Putin sees this, does this not embolden America's adversaries?
Yeah, of course it does. But what I think our adversaries should recognize is that America, when it is threatened directly, will respond. But I think we're already seeing, increasing aggression, I would say by Russia, by China, by Iran. And I think it's worth noting, although this is really not well understood, but at the height of popular opposition to the Vietnam War in 67 to 68, Kim Il-sung in North Korea, he said, okay, well, America's weak, America's vulnerable, and he launched a major insurgency against South Korea. And over 300 attacks in that year, 15 Americans were killed and 65 wounded. Many more Americans, by the way, than who were killed and wounded in recent years in Afghanistan. So, it really breaks my heart because of what's occurring with the Afghan people. But where are the people now, right, who came up with the doctrine of the right to protect? Are they crying crocodile tears, in the White House? Where are the people the humanitarians, right? The women's rights activists? Why aren't they calling really for the use of military force against the Taliban? And Yalda, what really is crazy about this is you heard that this was a futile endeavor, right? It was an endless war. Well, we were fighting there with a very small number of troops to enable the Afghans to take the brunt of the fight to prevent what we're seeing right now.
Well,
now, was that
President
worth it?
Biden
and
says,
I think, of course, it was.
President Biden says bad things happen everywhere. We can't be everywhere.
Well, we can be in Afghanistan. And in fact, we were there, with a very small commitment and an effective commitment. So actually, it was our disengagement that set conditions. And Yalda, as you alluded to already, it was actually this capitulation agreement where we made concession after concession, didn't insist on a ceasefire, forced the Afghan government to release 5,000 of some of the most heinous people on earth, one of whom you interviewed at the outset of this program. And so on our way out, we actually weakened the Afghan government and bolstered the Taliban. Yalda, I could not believe that the U.S. Secretary of State wrote a letter to President Ashraf Ghani and said, hey, you need to do more for peace. In the midst of the beginning of this offensive, a massive assassination campaign, did he write a letter to Hibatullah Akhundzada? Of course not. But I would say how many Americans, how many citizens in the United Kingdom even know who the heck Hibatullah Akhundzada is, right? And I think that we are narcissistic in our approach to the war because we define really even the most consequential competitions abroad, based on what we would prefer to do. And in fact,
General,
what we did
you're a soldier. You served in Afghanistan. You led men in Afghanistan. You lost men in Afghanistan. What do you say to all of those American mothers, British mothers, mothers of people who sent their sons there, who would say now, what was all this for?
Well, I mean, they were engaged in a noble endeavor. What you see today is what they were preventing from happening, what they had reversed, right? You know, you interviewed people who lived through the hell of Taliban rule in Afghanistan from 1996 to 2001. I mean, you know, and Yalda, you lived it yourself, you know, the hell of the Civil War from 1992 to 1996. So I think that what our soldiers, were engaged in was a noble endeavor in the interest of all humanity, and they should be proud of that. But I think what's wrong with Western society these days, Yalda, is that we have cheapened and coarsened the warrior ethos. So, some, I think, citizens in Western democracies think that soldiers want pity. Soldiers don't want to be pitied. Soldiers have authorship over their own future. What they want is political leadership that is committed to securing an outcome in wars that is worthy of the sacrifices that soldiers make in combat. And what we have seen, I think, now is just a weakening of our will and our determination. Really, we defeated ourselves in Afghanistan. The Taliban are not, they're not winning on their own volition. They're winning because we did not sustain the will to continue the effort in the interest of all humanity.
General McMaster, always great to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining us here on the programme.
Thanks for having me, Yalda.
Now, this is BBC News. I'm Yalda Hakim with a special programme about the conflict in Afghanistan and the future of the country. As the Taliban take yet another provincial capital and close in on Kabul, there are reports from the peace talks that the militants have been offered a power-sharing deal. The UN is warning of an unfolding humanitarian disaster as Kabul is swamped by Afghans displaced by the fighting. We'll cross live to Kabul for the latest on how the Afghan capital is coping with the influx of refugees. We'll also hear from the head of the British Armed Forces about whether Afghanistan could become a pariah state if the Taliban take full control.
I think they don't want to become North Korea. I think they know that they've got Afghan people now who have seen over the last 20 years what it might be like to have a flourishing media, a civil society, education.
Pakistan has long been accused of providing support to the Taliban, a claim denied by Islamabad. We'll talk live to Pakistan's National Security Advisor. Hello and welcome to viewers in the UK and around the world to this BBC News special on Afghanistan and endless war. In less than a week, the Taliban have taken over the capitals of more than a quarter of the country's provinces. The violence has resulted in an acute humanitarian crisis, tens of thousands displaced without access to the most basic resources. From Kabul, Yugita Lamai with cameraman Sanjay Gunguli reports.
Desperation on a scale not seen in decades. Thousands have arrived in Kabul in the past few days. People who had homes and jobs, who led dignified lives, forced to leave everything behind. Angry that they've been left on their own. No government, no humanitarian agencies. Malaka's sons are in the army. She says only the poor go to the battlefield while politicians watch.
We've seen this camp grow by the hour. People have been coming in from different parts of the country as more and more provincial capitals, more and more cities are being taken over by the Taliban. Many of those we've met here have run once, twice, multiple times, and now they've come here to Afghanistan's capital, Kabul. From here, they say, there's nowhere else to go.
To get here, they've survived dangerous journeys, past Taliban checkpoints and active front lines. Gulalai says they moved from one place to another for 3 days before they got to Kabul. She has 4 children. The youngest is 2. Ten-year-old Khalida was in school taking her exams when the Taliban attacked. Many had to leave their dead behind to save their own lives. Sheer Mohammad's parents died in the violence. Many here have fled from Kunduz in North Afghanistan, which fell to the Taliban on Sunday. Today in Kabul, we bumped into these men who we'd met 4 weeks ago in Kunduz. Then, the city was a refuge for tens of thousands of people who'd fled fighting in villages. Now we've learned that in recent days, mortar shells landed in these camps. We don't know what happened to the people we'd met there. Most of the north of the country has been taken over by the Taliban now. Those who've escaped to Kabul are staring at uncertainty. Fears that the capital too could fall within weeks. Yalda Lamay, BBC News, Kabul.
Okay, Yogita joins us live now from Kabul. And Yogita, a really heartbreaking humanitarian crisis unfolding there.
That's right. The UN has called it a humanitarian catastrophe, and this is something, yesterday we saw thousands of people coming in, and it's with violence surging in many parts of this country, it is only going to get worse. The government is saying that they will house these people in mosques and provide them with food, but from what we saw on the ground, there were not nearly enough supplies for the many people who were coming in. And today, just about 150 kilometers south of Kabul, the city of Ghazni, the provincial capital of the province of Ghazni, has also been taken over by the Taliban. A provincial council member has confirmed to the BBC that the group has taken over the city, except for one police base on the outskirts. So their offensive really continuing in the south as well. They already control most of the north of the country. In the south, we're seeing in Kandahar yesterday, they broke into the central jail and freed more than 1,000 prisoners. In Lashkargah, the capital of Helmand province, they took over a police headquarters there, which they're going to see as a major victory. Afghan forces are saying that they are fiercely defending most of the major cities, and they do still control them. But this is violence. These are battles that are intensifying every day.
Yogita, thank you so much for that update and your reporting there from Kabul. Now, according to the UN, more than 1,000 Afghan civilians have been killed amid fierce fighting between the Taliban and government forces in the past month, while in recent days, thousands more have been fleeing their homes. I've been speaking with the head of the British Armed Forces, General Sir Nick Carter, about the fight against the Taliban, the human cost of the conflict, and the battle for the country.
General Nick, since President Biden's announcement, the Taliban have made dramatic advances. Is it time for the West, the Americans, to rethink their approach when it comes to Afghanistan?
I think not necessarily. I'm a firm believer that the Afghan security forces that are there and the government as a whole are capable of holding on to those bits of the country that really matter. And I think that's important that they do that, because if they do that, there's a chance then I think the Taliban are more likely to come to the table, because they'll recognise that they have to find a political compromise. And I always go back to the ulama announcement, the Council of the Joint Religious Councils, about 6 weeks ago, which happened under the aegis of the Grand Sheikh, where the war was declared illegal. And I think the moral high ground can be seized by the Afghan government if they're able to hold on to those key bits of Afghanistan at the moment.
In your view, though, do the Taliban care about legitimacy or whether something is illegal or not?
Well, I think we're, of course, making a mistake of thinking the Taliban's a homogenous entity. And as you know just as well as I do, they're not. And indeed, there's probably quite a disconnect between what happens in the political commission in Doha and what happens in the various bits of the battlefield of Afghanistan, where the military commission in all its guises is doing its own thing. So I think we need to be careful not to judge it as a homogenous entity with a single set of political objectives. And I bet you, with the amount of success they appear to be having on the battlefield at the moment, that they will be riven with division, because they'll be wondering who's going to be in charge if they win. So I think it's quite difficult to predict any of that.
Do you think then the political office in Doha is redundant?
No, I don't. But I think it'll be interesting to see how it tries to bring the rest of the movement together with it. And I think we should be watching to see how that happens. I'm also certain that there's a big disparity between what the political commission, in particular Mullah Barada, is saying in public and, of course, what he's actually doing, wandering around, doing a bit of diplomacy in Russia and China. And there's a big disparity between that and what's happening on the battlefield, where we're seeing atrocities being committed, we're seeing war crimes being committed, we're seeing women being brutalised, we're seeing forced marriages, all the sorts of things that the Taliban were notorious for in the past. And there's a disparity there. So I think that needs to be called out.
The UN says they still have strong links with al-Qaeda. What's your assessment?
Well, we're hearing, aren't we, that al-Qaeda-affiliated fighters are being used on the battlefield. So I suspect that's probably a pretty fair assessment. I mean, it remains to be seen how this plays out in the longer term. But let's face it, if we end up with a scenario where state fractures and you end up essentially with a security vacuum, then there's absolutely ideal conditions for international terrorism and violent extremism to prosper yet again.
Are you worried this could turn into another Rwanda or Srebrenica?
I think if we end up with it becoming a security vacuum and we end up with the chaos that comes with those sorts of vacuums, all things are possible. But I think we have to be talking away from that. I think we have to be getting behind the Afghan government and its people at the moment and encouraging them to show unity, to show defiance, and to show confidence in their security forces, and to hold on to those provincial capitals that fundamentally matter to the Afghan government's legitimacy.
Many people now, experts, analysts, the Afghans themselves, continue to point the finger of blame at Pakistan. What's Pakistan's role and responsibility in all of this?
Well, Pakistan, of course, has lived with this challenge for many years. I mean, ever since the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. And the reality, of course, is that they've got between 1.5 and 3 million Afghan refugees on their soil. And they have had for many, many years now. So from their perspective, they are absolutely invested in whatever the outcome is going to be. And certainly in my engagements with my Pakistani opposite number, General Bajwa, I'm in no doubt that he is very genuine when he says that he wants a stable and moderate Afghanistan.
Do you not see this unfolding into a terrible humanitarian tragedy in the next weeks and sort of months to come?
Well, I think we've already got a humanitarian tragedy. The question now is whether it gets worse or not. And so much of that depends upon how the parties now behave and whether or not the Afghan government can bind together the population that it governs still to provide real unity and real confidence and a real sense of purpose to be defiant. And if they can do that, then there's every reason to suppose that the parties will have to come together to talk about the future at a table.
And finally, if the Taliban do overrun the country and take it by force, will that become a problem for the West?
I mean, I think there's a big question about their legitimacy when that happens, and whether the West still wants to support Afghanistan if the Taliban have seized the country in a fashion that is quite obviously illegitimate. I think that would be a very difficult question for governments to want to answer. But I'm not sure. Do the Taliban really want to become a pariah state again? I'm not sure they necessarily do. I think what we have to watch is the extent to which the Taliban holds together in a homogenous way, and whether the words that the political commission are talking to at the moment end up being the reality that appears on the ground.
But do you genuinely think they care about legitimacy?
I think they don't want to become North Korea. I think they know that they've got Afghan people now who have seen over the last 20 years what it might be like to have a flourishing media, a civil society, education, women at work, women in government. I think they've seen all of that. Now, I hope that if trying to govern all Afghans, they will take account of those Afghans who form that civil society.
So you've accepted that there is a possibility that the Taliban could come back to power in Afghanistan?
Whatever may happen, there surely has to be a political compromise. And whether that means a Taliban government, whether it means a government in which power is shared, that remains to be seen. It very much depends upon what happens over the next few weeks on that battlefield. But if a military stalemate is achieved by the current Afghan government and the people of Afghanistan are defiant and unified behind that effort, then there's no reason to suppose that you can't end up with a political compromise which works for the majority of Afghans.
General Nick, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
That was General Carter there speaking to me earlier. Now, the role of Afghanistan's neighbour Pakistan is increasingly coming under scrutiny. Pakistan has been accused of providing support to the Taliban in the past and again now. It's a claim Islamabad strongly denies. Prime Minister Imran Khan has reiterated his attempts to broker a peace deal with the Taliban, and Pakistan's National Security Advisor claims Pakistan is being maligned by regional rivals. We'll hear more from Mr. Yusuf in a few minutes, but let's talk about the situation in Pakistan with former Senator Afrasiab Khattak. Sir, thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. You watch the developments in Afghanistan very closely. Just tell us what you think is the reason behind the Taliban advance.
Well, I think the Doha deal was not really a deal for peace or reconciliation. It was a deal for withdrawal of American forces. And it did not talk about Taliban sanctuaries in Pakistan, which are there for decades. And Pakistan is fully supporting Taliban. Talibans are, in a way, an instrument of Pakistan's policy of strategic depth in Afghanistan. And I think Pakistan is very happy with Taliban's advances. Pakistani generals, I mean to say, the civilian government has no role in shaping this policy or executing it.
I mean, how concerned are you if the Taliban overrun Kabul and return to the country?
It's actually a terror syndicate that will take over power in Kabul again if that happens. And the consequences will not be different from the last time when they were allowed to overrun Afghan state system in 1990s. And we could see terror attacks in 4 continents of the world, including 9/11. Taliban are still accompanied by Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups. So I think that is very bad, as bad as the appeasement of Nazis in the 20th century.
Well, the Pakistani civilian government and the military establishment continue to deny that they have trained or harboured or are in support of the Taliban.
Well, I'm a Pashtun. I live in the area. I went to school in Waziristan. So we can see them. They have bases. There's Quetta Shura. This Taliban parallel government is sitting here, and hundreds of dead bodies have come back to Pakistan from the fighting. Taliban have taken out processions in Peshawar, in Quetta. They have received dead bodies with flags and chanting slogans. So it's not a secret. It's an open secret. But unfortunately, Pakistani generals have lived in denial. And the civilian governments, I don't accuse them because they really have very little role to play in all this.
What is your concern about the security situation in Pakistan should the Taliban return?
Well, it will lead to greater Taliban activity on Pakistani side of the Durand line, as it had happened in 2007, 8, 9, 10. You see, Taliban had captured our districts which were close to the Durand line, and this will happen again. TTP has become active. There have been dozens of attacks in the last 2-3 weeks. Pakistani media is not allowed to discuss this or report this. because the generals do not want to give the impression that they will also be facing problems. So I believe it's bad for Pakistan. It's a very bad policy, wrong policy, which has harmed Pakistan very badly in the past and is going to happen again. We can forget about CPAC, we can forget about tourism, we can forget about geoeconomics.
And are you concerned as well about the humanitarian crisis that could also unfold?
I'm deeply concerned. Unfortunately, the international community has put its back on the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. I don't see UN activating its agencies and support program. I don't see big powers going to Security Council and declaring something concrete. I think Afghan people have been thrown to the wolves. They have been thrown to the custody of terrorists. Their women are being abducted. They are being displaced from their homes. Thousands of them are marching on roads without any support, state support or non-governmental support. So it's a very bad situation, and we are very, very deeply concerned.
Okay, so thank you very much, Mr. Khattak, for joining us here on the programme.
Thank you, Yalda.
Now, we have heard how blame for the crisis engulfing Afghanistan is being directed as Pakistan. So what is their response to this? I'm joined now by Pakistan's National Security Advisor, Mr. Yusuf. Thank you, sir, for joining us here on the programme. You were just hearing there from Afrasiab Khattak, who is, like so many people, including many in Afghanistan, pointing the finger of blame at Pakistan. What's your response to that?
Thank you, ma'am. First of all, I was not informed that I was here to respond to an analyst and an opposition party member. I was told that I was here to speak to you and give you the position that we have. In any case, it's being done now, and I don't think it should be done in this way. Look, I think we can continue this conversation. We saw trends on Twitter saying, oh, Pakistan is the problem, sanction Pakistan. We looked into that. 65% were bots. The others were being done by Afghan government in Indian accounts. We can continue this conversation. We have a country in crisis. Afghanistan, every single day, a city is falling. There is violence. The world needs to focus on how to get to a political settlement immediately so that Afghan lives are spared. We can play the blame game. That's fine. We can continue doing that. Right now, Pakistan's only focus is on peace, political settlement, working with the US and other international community members who seem to have abandoned Afghanistan yet again, to try and convince them that we cannot sit on the sidelines. We have to make this happen for the sake of the average Afghan.
Mr. Moeed, I'm just going to jump in there, because what Afrasiab Khattak was saying there, and I know that you say you don't want to directly respond to what he's saying, but he's saying the civilian government in Pakistan is a very different entity to the security establishment. And it's the security establishment that are funding, harbouring, supporting and training the Taliban. In fact, the Interior Minister of Pakistan on the 27th of June, Sheikh Rashid Ahmad, said, the Taliban live here in Pakistan. Sometimes their dead bodies arrive, and sometimes they come here in hospitals to get medical treatment.
Yes, ma'am. These people, their parents were Afghan refugees. Some of them were born in Pakistan. Some of them married in Pakistan, because the world abandoned Afghanistan as it is doing now. And we had to deal with these people who were thrust upon us. Pakistan has 3.5 million refugees even today in our country. No other country has been so generous. Let me also make this clear.
But the point is about the sanctuaries that exist. I mean, the former head of Pakistan's intelligence service, General Asa Durrani, said when Pakistan was asked about whether it was playing a double game here on the BBC, he said, we have many games happening at any given time. We have balls up in the air, and we don't deal with things in a straight line. Sometimes people are our friends and sometimes they're not. The former president of Pakistan, General Musharraf, has said to the Wall Street Journal that we've used the Taliban as part of a proxy war in Afghanistan.
Ma'am, if you allow me to respond, it'll be good. First of all, the first gentleman retired about 25 years ago, when Pakistan and the US and the West, including the UK, were in this great war against the Soviet Union, which Pakistan worked with the West on, and it was eulogized always. Suddenly, we are talking about terrorism. I don't want to talk about the past. Let me just say this very simply. Pakistan stands for peace and only peace. The regions in Afghanistan that have fallen to the Taliban happen to be on the other side of Afghanistan, west and north. What has Pakistan? I mean, even if you were to create an allegation, it should be logical. The point is very simple. You say people go from here. Let me just tell you, give you a couple of facts. Pakistan has fenced the entire border. Pakistan has said, let's put biometrics so that we know every single person crossing. Afghanistan government refused. Fencing, they opposed. Pakistan is saying, let's go to a visa regime so that no illegal crossing can happen. Afghan government, not for it. If there was anybody going from here that Pakistan wanted, would we be closing the border? Would we be manning the border? Or should Afghanistan be eager to close it? I think sincerity on the other side needs to be looked at. There are real questions being asked.
Mr. Yusuf, unfortunately, we just have a few seconds left on the programme, but thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. That was Afghanistan Special here on BBC World News, an endless war. We will, of course, be continuing our coverage. Thank you very much for joining us here for this special. We'll be back in the next few minutes.